Actual Fluency Podcast, episode 45 with Robin MacPherson, Developing the Method. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. This is episode 45 and today I'm joined again by Robin MacPherson. Robin was part of episodes 9 and 10, and if you haven't listened to those already, I strongly recommend you do. It was one of the best received episodes, or both of them were very well received, and we get into a lot of topics about learning languages, methods, sort of feeling how you feel about everything. So today I brought him back, and the reason I brought him back is because he had contacted me not too long ago about the fact that he had sort of changed his mind on the method. What he meant to say was that he had developed his method further, and he was not really doing the same things as he was before. So I thought it would be interesting to take a talk with Robin and listen to how the method gets developed, the language learning method. And as always, we're not trying to, or at least I'm not trying to sell you on one particular method. I hope that the purpose or the motive comes across that we're just trying to show you various ways of doing it. And today Robin and I are going to share a lot of pointers about methods and our own experiences. And actually a big reason I also wanted to talk to Robin is because he's improved his French dramatically. I mean, basically last time I talked to him, he couldn't really speak that well, or maybe even limited sentences. But now he just put up a video, and I'll link to it from the show notes, which you can always find on actualfluency.com/the episode number. So in this case, /45 or 45. Basically, he's improved his French dramatically, and in today's episode, we're kind of diving into the changes he has done to make that happen. Another announcement I just wanted to make before I let you loose with the interview with Robin MacPherson is that the podcast is ending. Yes, it's the sad announcement, but don't worry, it's only season 1 that's ending. As for season 2, it will be coming up shortly, and the 50th episode will be the last of season 1. And if you're wondering why this episode is a little bit short on effects, or the typical announcer that I have, it's because the computer I use to edit the episodes with is dead, and unfortunately it can't be saved. But what I've decided to do instead is to call this season 1 over and then work on season 2. And I have some great plans for season 2 to improve not only the audio quality, but also the quality of the guests, the quality of sort of the interviews. I have some improvements that I think I can make. And if you have any ideas, questions, comments about season 2, feel free to send them to me. You can find the contact page on actualfluency.com or email chris@actualfluency.com and I'll find it. And, now that the computer died, I'm kind of in a bit of a tough spot. So what I thought was, why don't I offer you, the listener, to be part of season 2 and sort of support the show in the way you prefer. So what I'm actually going to do is set up a Indiegogo campaign, a crowdfunding campaign, and then I'll give you some awesome rewards for supporting the show. But that's coming very soon. It's we're only at episode 45, so there's still a few episodes to go, and I'm incredibly excited about finishing this season, but also moving into the second season, where hopefully the episodes will only get better and we can make this the number 1 language learning podcast in the world. I'm so grateful for you listening in today, and I hope you enjoyed the interview with Robin MacPherson. All right, we're back, and this time I've got a repeat guest. It's Robin MacPherson. Hey. And last time he was on the show, he was the first one to do a double header, a double episode, because we had so many great things to talk about. And Robin has promised us today that he won't go on for that long. But Robin, can you just update us on what's been going on since we last talked, and how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well, thank you, Chris. A lot of things have happened in the last 8-9 months since we talked. I have moved country. This will be the third time in a few days from now. So I left the States after I graduated. I spent 7 or 8 months in England, where I was just basically working on my languages and working full time in a non-related job. And I moved to France just about 2.5 weeks ago, and I'll be leaving France on Friday this week. So a lot of things have happened in terms of my sort of general life track, but also a lot of development. I think I've definitely matured a lot, not only in my life, but in my language learning. And that has brought around a lot of changes in my language learning methodology and my practices, particularly since we last talked.
Fantastic. So, and that'll be the topic for today, is that we're going to talk about how we can sort of change our minds, and that's a positive way. Yeah. And I'd like to just preface that with an interesting tidbit I heard recently. I don't know if you know the show QI. You probably do.
I do not.
Quite interesting. It's with Mr. Stephen Fry. It's an English program.
Oh, yes, I do. I lied. I do know. Yes.
Okay, fantastic. And it's basically they just come up with a lot of random facts of knowledge. And there was a particular program where Stephen brought up that 50 years from now, half of what we assumed to be right today we will discover was wrong.
Okay.
Or maybe the time period was even shorter. I'm just paraphrasing. Basically, what I'm prefacing is that the importance of having an open mind, particularly in language learning, but in generally everything we do, and don't get locked down on a method. And I guess the problem with doing a podcast is a lot of you people listening out there, you probably maybe found the podcast later and then went back to listen to sort of Robin's episode. And that it doesn't mean that the methodology that Robin was talking about last time was bad, or like that it somehow worked against your language learning or anything. It's just a basic development that you kind of have to try things to figure out what works for you. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And that's the sort of the lead in, because last time I believe we were talking about you were using subtitles, like you were watching a Japanese drama, and you were also using a book for reading, The Little Prince. You know,
yes, a lot
of people love that book. But can you just, in maybe a minute or two, summarize what you were doing before, and then what kind of sort of thoughts you had about this, and what made you change?
Sure. Yeah, I think I want to say I definitely agree with you, and I think that, like many things in life, it's sort of a natural process that happens. Things develop, things evolve, things change. Species of humans and animals, ideas, information and knowledge, it's constantly developing. So I think you're right. I think that a language learning method of any one person changing over time is a very natural process. I think it's something that people need to be open to. In terms of what I was doing before, I think before I had a pretty good idea of a sort of general method and like a structure, so I talked about how I would start off with like a general book, just basically trying to get some general knowledge, get some basic vocabulary, understand the grammar a little bit. And then I went straight into reading. I talked about how I did a reading phase and some certain things. And then I had a sort of a listening phase. And so I had a sort of skeleton, but I think I was actually still quite confused with the particulars of a lot of what I was doing before. For example, with reading's been a big challenge for me with French. French has been the language I've focused on the most since we last spoke. And it's a big challenge for me. Like I no matter what I tried, I read The Little Prince and it went really well for me. When I started trying to read novels and literature and other kinds of books, I really struggled a lot. And I found that I switched. So I still was reading, which is what I said last time, but I kept switching my exact methodology for how was I tackling these books, how was I reading them, and it just but it wasn't kind of working. I felt at the time, I felt like, why can I still not read a book? Because that was what I was gauging my progress with. Could I or could I not read a book with no problem? Which I think was kind of wrong. But what happened was over time, I just kept changing and changing. Like I was basically just trying new things. I would read a book one way. I would try it. I would I would tackle it, look up the words, then it would be too hard, so I'd change book, change method. But what I realized over time is that as I kept sort of changing, what I was really doing was developing my method. Does that make sense? And so what I realized is, I mean, you discussed this a couple of times, is that I realized that what people talk about as being the most efficient method or the most effective method, I realized that isn't actually, in my opinion, the most important question. And I talked to you about, I thought maybe I'll write a blog post one day called the most inefficient method of language learning. Because what I realized is the fact is, a lot of people in the language learning community that are a bit more, like, especially the informed people that make videos and such, they talk about how, looking at words is a bad practice sometimes, or, a lot of people talk about extensive reading. And so this is kind of how I was being influenced. But I realized the fact is I love looking at words. I love it. And my drama method, which has worked very, very well for me in Japanese before, involves me watching a drama, and then it involves me using Japanese subtitles to look up every single unknown word, idiom, phrase, everything, grammar points that I see. And I realized that works for me because I like it and because it excites me. And so, you know what, who cares if theoretically that might be a less efficient approach, perhaps, according to some people. This is what I realized, and this is the biggest, I think, development I've had in my language learning maturity, is that I realized as I was trying different methods, as I was trying different extensive reading techniques, I kept coming back to my dictionary because I wanted to know what the heck was going on. I wanted to know. And I realized that's okay, and I think that's the biggest thing that I'm doing differently now than I was when we last spoke, is that I'm doing whatever feels right to me and whatever I enjoy, and I'm just sort of persisting, and I realized that I thought that each method I tried reading wasn't working, and that's why I kept switching. Turns out the whole time it was working. The whole time I was still learning new words. I was still improving my reading ability. And so I just suddenly arrived at this level where now I can read novels with no problem in French. Now I can listen to films and understand what they're saying,
Mm-hmm.
And
so can you give a specific example for that? Like when you were developing your French, for instance, would you pick up a book that was too difficult for you and then have a dictionary next to you on the computer, and then every time you noticed a word, you looked it up and wrote it down, or did you just look it up? What did you do in that process? So
what I did, I started a book. One example, I started a book when I felt, you know what, I'm ready now. My French is getting better. I picked up a book called Les Métaphysiques des Tubes, which is by Amélie Nothomb, and it's Metaphysics of Tubes. And I thought, okay, here we go. I'm just going to plow through this book. At first I thought, I'm going to read it. I'm going to read one chapter and not look a single word up. And then I'll go back and then I'll look up the words. Tried that, and I tried it for a little bit, did a couple of chapters. I was getting a little frustrated. I just wanted to look up the words. And I kind of gradually got back into this sort of... I started looking at words again. I would look up every single word. First time around, I would write it down in a notebook, So I was looking up a lot of words, and I was getting exposed to a lot of words.
Yeah.
And then I thought, no, this isn't working. It's taking me too long. This is hard. So I tried a different method. I tried reading the chapter and underlining the unknown words, but not looking them up. And then going back after the chapter, I tried writing a glossary. I tried, so these are just several examples of various different ways you can tackle a reading something.
Right.
One that worked quite well is that I was reading a book called La grammaire est une chanson douce. The grammar is a sweet song or a soft song. And I would write down every unknown word, but I wouldn't look it up. So I would write down every unknown word on a piece of paper, but keep going, not stop to look it up, just write it down. And then I found that, a lot of times just the act of writing this word down, I actually figured the meaning of the word out while I was writing it down and didn't need to go to the dictionary. So anyway, these are just various examples of stuff that I did. But as you can imagine, my methods, all of those different methods still involved looking up new words at some point. And so even though I kept changing and kept second guessing myself and kept saying, oh my God, I'm doing it wrong, because that's not work, because I'm not fluent in reading yet, so I must be doing it wrong. But I realized all of those different methods I was using were still building my vocabulary.
Of course,
right? Even though I didn't finish a book for a long time, I got very close. I was very persistent with the first one, the Metaphysics of Tubes. Oh my God, I spent like a month and a half, maybe literally even 2 months on that one little book, because I was like, I am not going to give up. And I looked up thousands of words, And so, like I said, it wasn't that it wasn't working, and it wasn't that any one of the methods was the wrong method. All of them were building my vocabulary. All of them were building my reading ability, my reading fluency, and all these different things. And so one thing led to another. I don't know which particular method sort of helped me more or less. I also tried graded readers, by the way. I should mention that. I started trying graded readers. Yeah. I started trying different, I tried so many things. But just a combination of all those things, it got me to that level where I am now. Where now I can finally do it, and it is so much fun.
Yeah, I think that we are at any point in our language learning journey, we are a product of everything we've subjected ourselves to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and you can talk about efficiency all you want, but if you enjoy doing what you're doing, and and that allows you to put in, let's say, hours and hours a day without getting bored or fed up with it, then that is a much more efficient method than doing something very efficient that you get bored of within no time.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And this is why I think I mentioned to you before, I would be terrible at making a language learning program.
Right.
In terms of learn like me, because people like that. Because the fact is, the stuff that I do would probably drive a lot of people insane. Looking up every single unknown word. Maybe people don't like that, but that doesn't matter. And this is, because you need to find what you like.
Yeah.
And that can only really be done, I think, through trial and error. Trying such and such person's method, trying this person's method, trying extensive reading, trying graded readers. Just try, because if you are making contact with the language and you are getting exposure, like you said, your overall ability will be a product of all those different things. And over time, if you're persistent, you will eventually find your groove. And I think that's the difference between the big successful polyglots, is that they found their groove. And that's why they all have a method. Well, not all of them, but that's why you can buy a course on that person's method, because they figured it out.
Yeah, but that's because I think what that means, if we should translate it a little bit, is that person's method or whatever is the sort of the point they are at now.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Which I agree. It doesn't mean that it's the final point, but it does mean that they've spent a lot of time getting there, and they picked up all these experiences along the way and arrived there. And I think that one of the key points is that it is a journey. And you need to sort of do it yourself. You can't. Yeah. I can't take your experiences and use them for my learning, because I would have missed a lot of the points along the way that made you realize why where you are now is the best step, sort of.
Exactly, you're right. And one thing that another, I'll try to be really quick with this. Another big thing I learned, and that a massive shift happened to me at the Polyglot conference in Serbia, just to give them a bit of promotion.
Go for it, yeah.
And it was just that I was looking at all these big name polyglots, and also other people that were very impressive, but just didn't have the reputation, or just anybody. And the people that really seemed to have cracked it for them, not in general, because it's different for everybody, but the people that had really found their particular groove, at least at that particular time, I realized that they had simplified the process tremendously. And so what I did, I tried to figure out what are the similarities between what that guy does and what she does and him. And I realized that, language learning is not that complicated, actually. I realized that although there are complicated elements, you can pretty much simplify it, in my opinion, now to a few very simple stages. And if you look at it in terms of words, I realized, a lot of people talk about this. Dr. Iverson talked about it. Dr. Arguez talked about it at the conference, but a lot of other people too. It's that, a big part of any language competency is that first sort of 2,000 or 3,000 words. Those first 2,000 or 3,000 most common words that show up all the time. They're also more difficult to acquire in terms of having it, because they have many meanings. Most of those words, they appear so much that they have many different nuances. They have many different feelings. And so it's hard to acquire any one of those words with just one meaning, right? Whereas really complicated words, like when I gave an example of my recent video was katabatic winds or whatever, that means one thing. Right. It doesn't mean one thing now and one thing if you're in love and one thing if it's dark outside. It means one thing. And so I realized that, the first step in my process, now, this is how I would describe it now, is I'm simply doing whatever I can to acquire those first 2,000 or 3,000 words. It could be, and this is what's important, and this is the lesson I've taken away, is that, like I said, when I was trying out all those different methods, what I was essentially doing was just doing whatever the heck I could to build up the vocabulary that I needed to be able to read, which was my goal at that time. That makes sense. So I realized that the first step of my language learning process now, and I've done this for German, I'm doing it in Spanish, is that I'm just doing whatever I can to acquire those first 3,000 words the best I can to get a feeling for the language, and I'm just acquiring that particular chunk. And that's kind of like the skeleton for me of the language. I find that when I acquire roughly that sort of amount of words and I get to that kind of stage, I'm pretty much able to start chatting.
Right, yeah.
I'm at the point where I can actually start to read. I'm at the point where I can kind of start to get stuff out of these. Does that make sense? So that's my first goal, whether it be Duolingo, maybe it's Blue, whatever, maybe it's Asimil. It really doesn't matter. Right. And with German, I did several. I did a bit of Rosetta Stone. I did a bit of Duolingo. Did a bit of Asimil because I kept getting bored of one.
Yeah.
Tired of the other. But the point is, I realized that's okay because I'm still doing the same thing. I'm just acquiring enough words and enough exposure to where I can then move to the next step where I'm able to start taking advantage of books. And, does that make sense? So I realized it's not that complicated. Just do whatever you got to do, whatever feels best to you at that moment, like you mentioned, to acquire the words you need, to acquire the grammar structure, whatever the heck it is that you need to do to get to that next step.
What did you find worked in terms of converting, let's say, looking up a word, looking up the meaning of a word, and then converting that to long-term memory?
I would say the two different things are like frequent exposure. So obviously, which means at the end of the day, the more you read, the more you listen to, the more chance you're going to give yourself of hearing particular words again. But I think the biggest thing that helped me convert things to long-term memory is actually being excited about them and having a lust for more. Because when I'm excited about what I'm reading, I'm going to remember it better, whatever it is.
Right.
And so I would say a couple of things that help. The biggest one, really, honestly, is probably just being excited. And that's, motivation gets talked about a lot in some other ways, but I think, you got to find a way to make yourself excited about those new words that you're acquiring. And, but there's that. And I found that, like I said, looking words up in dictionaries was actually exciting for me. So that's what worked for me. The other thing, of course, is, the more I read, the more I would see. So frequent exposure to the same words, obviously, it really helps to cement things. And then using them. I have a lot of techniques that I use that involve using words and things like shadowing. I do shadowing techniques now where, I think I described to you one time where I shadow dramas. I actually sit there and I learn what they're saying. I read the subtitles in the language. And if someone's shouting in Japanese at their employee, I shout too. And if someone's being timid and afraid, I'm afraid too. Whatever I can do to involve myself with that word and those grammar structures and whatever else, it helps me to convert that into long-term knowledge, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's cool. I like that. And you didn't mention flashcards at any point, so I assume that you found that by involving the words naturally and just seeing them in context is more valuable in the memory than sort of drilling.
I think it is, honestly. It's funny. I didn't even realize I didn't mention it. It's like, and here's the funny thing. When I did Little Prince, and when I did Amelie, that book about metaphysics of tubes, I was actually putting at various stages all of the new words into my Anki decks.
Yeah.
And then later I tried memorize. But the funny thing is, I realized that it took me so long to put those 1,500 new words I'd written down into Anki. I didn't end up really using the flashcards because then I was learning new ones. So what I found is I like writing. I should have mentioned that. I think writing also really, really helps. And so what I did just recently, my documentary study, which was, oh my God, so helpful. And I think everybody should do that because it's just so good and effective. But what I've been doing is I've been writing down all of the new words I learn.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I do anything with them afterwards. I do keep the lists, but I find that just the act of writing it down, and I'm pausing it and I'm writing it down quickly so I can keep playing it because I'm so interested. Just that act of writing it down for me, it deepens the cognitive process so much because I'm not just taking it in, I'm then producing it whether that's speaking or just writing it, or I could write it and speak it. It's not very difficult to say it as you write it down. So I think writing is great, but I think that's a very interesting thing you've noticed there. Is that I guess I don't really, do flashcarding much
That's
anymore.
Cool. No, it's cool. It's cool. The thing I was thinking about is we've talked a lot about reading, and you said it a few minutes ago. You said that I felt like I was suddenly able to sort of converse with anyone after a certain amount of words. But normally what I've found, and this is just a personal thing, is if I focus a lot on reading, I struggle a little bit to actually produce and engage in conversation. Do you have any tips for me for countering that sort of being too bookish instead?
Yeah, I would say I think it's that. Here's a good thing to do. I don't know if you're familiar with the islands sort of technique or that idea. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Islands is basically I forgot the guy's name now, Boris something. But it's basically just a simple idea where you build up what's called islands, which is essentially like mounds of vocabulary, right, based on themes. And so, if you want to talk about, I did this in Japan. I love the global food system. I love agriculture. And I knew I was going to want to discuss this with people in Japan. And so I learned a lot of words deliberately from reading and from whatever else. I learned a lot of words that I knew were going to come up in these conversations. That makes sense? So you build little islands. And the idea is that, let's say you have 3 islands. One of them is your greetings. One of them is cooking. And one of them is Danish politics, whatever. Well, what that allows you to do when you're speaking to people is that if the conversation starts to go away and it goes to somewhere you're not comfortable, you can bring it back to one of your islands. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So you can kind of bring, and so that's one technique. But I think talking to, I talk to myself a lot in languages, and that really helps getting better at speaking. Right. Because essentially all you need to do is you need to not just read, you need to practice using what you're reading, right? I think that's really the best way to counter that problem that you're having is you're having trouble using it, right? You're having trouble activating those words. And I think the best way to do it is to use them. Yeah,
translating sort of the written word into spoken.
Exactly. And so one thing is I do everything out loud, right? So when I did Rosetta Stone for a while, whatever, regardless of people's opinion on it, I did it for a while, years ago. And every single thing that came on that screen, I read out loud.
Right.
When I did Duolingo, which I really enjoy Duolingo and I recommend it, I read every sentence out loud for the most part. So I think that might also help me, that I'm constantly, I don't just wait for the program for the few times when it asks me to read out loud. I read everything out loud. So I'm constantly saying things. So that might help as well, because once again, you're deepening the cognitive process. You're involving your brain more with the word by actually saying it or writing it down. So I think writing things down and saying them will help you. I find writing helps my speaking a lot. I don't know if you've ever tried that or ever experienced that, but writing helps my speaking tremendously, because it's kind of the same thing. You're producing the language.
Yeah, comes you just have a little place probably.
Exactly. Yeah. So that talking to yourself and simply, if you have the ability, which I often don't. This is what's funny. I have very little experience speaking in French, actually. Mm-hmm. Compared to Japanese, I have minimal. I hardly get a chance to speak French, but yeah, I can speak it pretty well now. I have no problem conversing. I make mistakes, but I can talk. And most people do ask me, like, how long have you lived in France or whatever. And I think there must be something to do with these small things that I'm doing, because I'm not getting a chance to speak a lot. Right. But yeah, when I do speak, I speak fine. So I think there's a lot of stuff people can do. And I think those are 2 things, writing or speaking out loud, talking to yourself, reading things out loud, just involving your mouth in your process. Oh, I should mention that really quickly. Reading out loud is also something I do.
Right.
And maybe that would help. Do you read out loud?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah.
Okay, reading out loud is fantastic. And I think that everybody should read out loud when they can.
We're starting a campaign, readoutloud.org or something.
No, you're right. No, I mean, and you know what? Yeah, it's right. I've been in Paris for a couple of weeks, which, like I said in my video, I don't think that counts as living here. So no one can really say, oh, well, you speak French because you live there. Well, whatever. 2 weeks. Been on my own the whole time.
Exactly.
But, I've been in little cafes here in Paris, and you know what? People think I'm weird because I'm reading out loud. So, I realize that's not everybody's cup of tea. But, if you are at home and if you are, somewhere quiet and you feel comfortable, or if you're in a loud cafe where no one really cares anyway, read out loud. And I think that might also help transform your simple reading activity into a much deeper and much more perhaps profitable one for your speaking.
Right. Where did you get the pronunciation impressions from if you didn't? I mean, you've only been in France for a few weeks, and you've been reading a lot at home. So where did you get you must have the original pronunciations from somewhere, right? You couldn't just make them up.
Yeah, I think this comes from experience as a language learner, partly. I think once you've acquired several languages, I think you get a certain sort of plasticity in terms of, like you're used to making more sounds. But I think a lot of it, I do listen a lot too, remember? I listen a lot.
Right, like radio.
Well, not radio, it's just that, but here's the funny thing, I'm always reading. So even when I'm listening, I'm still normally reading, right? So if I'm watching a drama or a documentary, and I just we've got to discuss that because it was so helpful. But I'm reading the subtitles in the language, and not always. Sometimes I'll do it without purposely, which is also important. But most of the time, I'm still reading, and so I do also do a lot of listening consequently through my reading activities, and so I think that might also be part of where I get my accent from. I think it's a combination of things, but I think that, and once again, speaking out loud, I think honestly, you know what, that it's so helpful.
That's the top tip of this week.
Well, it just is, because if you think about it, one of the problems that people have trouble with speaking, I think it's just simply confidence. It's, you're not used to using those muscles in that way, right? It's almost like just reading about something in theory all the time and never trying it. If someone then says, okay, here's a good example, me. I've read loads of books about woodworking. I love woodworking.
Yeah,
I'm a little mini woodworking fanatic. Primitive living skills. I'm in love with friction fire. Right, I love it. I have read so much about friction fire. I could explain to you everything about it. I'll tell you how to do it. But the thing is, I've never done it.
Right.
And so, if you asked me right now to go build a friction fire, well, heck yeah, I'm going to find it pretty darn hard. And I might fail actually the first time. I probably would fail. And I did try it once with a friend actually, and yeah, we failed. So that's the thing. I think it's the same thing with speaking a language. No matter how much you listen to it and you read it, if you're not opening your mouth, then when you do try to, obviously it's going to be hard and you're not going to have the confidence. And so conversely, if you could imagine me reading all those books on woodworking, right? Mm-hmm. And all those books on friction fire, but imagine if I was trying it out as I was reading, then obviously, even with half the knowledge I have now about woodworking, I would probably be a much better practitioner of woodworking if I had been actually having the wood out and having my tools out and chiseling. You know what I mean?
Right.
I guarantee I would be a more proficient woodworker. But that doesn't mean now, when I do start practicing, I won't get better very quickly.
Right.
But I think this is the key. So, it comes down to a lot of things. And so I think me reading out loud, I'm essentially, every single word I read out loud is essentially practice for my pronunciation.
Right. Yeah, I was just curious where you got that initial pronunciation from. Because I can see how it's practice, but you need the listening as well. I think you forgot to mention at the beginning there.
Probably at the beginning, yeah. But that's why I mentioned then I listen a lot too.
Oh, okay, that's great.
So I think I do listen a lot. So I think it's a combination, but using your voice is so important. And I think people might have the impression that, well, if you're talking to yourself or if you're reading out loud, it's not helping your speaking ability because you're not actually talking to somebody. I think that's wrong. I think that it does a lot of stuff because, when you, I hear my own accent sometimes. I hear my own foreign accent sometimes in French, for example.
Yeah.
And I hear wow, I didn't like how I said that part, and then I fix it or I try it again. And so when I do speak in a real situation, I've so much practice of using my mouth, not necessarily conversing, but just using my mouth in that way, making those sounds that I know what's going to come out, and I'm fine with it. I think a lot of it involves anxiety. People have a lot of anxiety.
Yeah. Just relax. Don't worry.
Yeah, Exactly.
Be happy.
Confidence is such a big thing.
It really is.
And it starts with self-confidence. It's if you're not confident in your own ability to sort of make the sounds and your own, then you're not going to be able to sort of to use that in a real situation. So I guess that's a big tip from today, in my opinion, is use your mouth and really use, whether it's speaking to yourself, whether it's reading out loud, whether it's shadowing. Shadowing is fantastic, by the way.
Right.
You know what? Shadowing. You asked about pronunciation. Shadowing is a fantastic way to develop pronunciation.
Right. You listen to someone's pronunciation, then you backtrack and translate it, and then you reproduce the.
Yeah. It'd be fun. Why don't we do like a 15-second demonstration?
A 15-second demonstration. Yeah, go for it. Why not?
So why don't you just talk to me?
Talk to you.
Talk to you.
All right.
All right.
I think there's an echo.
Okay, I think that's an echo.
And now in Swedish.
In the Swedish. Okay. But right, you see what I'm saying? So that's what I do with French. That's what I do with Japanese.
Right.
Do you notice how I copied your laugh as well?
Yeah, you're very good.
And so
you practiced shadower.
I am, but I did that for Japanese, and I've got some, and I can do it. And what I used to do in Japan is I would be sitting on a subway or whatever, and I'd be actually whisper. You can whisper shadow, you can mumble. There's a lot of different ways you can engage in shadowing activities, and I used to just kind of shadow in different ways people around me talking. Must admit, a few times I embarrassed myself because you get a little too excited. And then when someone's like, "Nanjakore," I do it too. And then they're like, "What in the heck does that go?"
Yeah, they might think you're mad sometimes.
Yeah, because I'll be mumbling, right? But then when someone suddenly yells something out and I get so excited, I yell out too. It's kind of,
yeah.
But this is another fantastic thing you can do to improve pronunciation, shadowing. And surprisingly few people seem to either they know about it but don't use it, or they just don't know about it.
I think there's a connection to a comment I was going to make is that it seems like the focus right now of the entire polyglot philosophy is to get to speaking quickly, and that's totally fine. But the problem is that when you get to the point where you focus so much on the spoken, people assume that reading is a slow kind of. Well, that's not necessary anyway, because I just want to speak.
Yeah.
But I think what I'm realizing lately, and also after this talk, is that, reading is really beneficial to your entire language learning, not just speaking. So I think that's, or reading, but I think it's something that it definitely is not being done much, like you say. And somebody like, Arkels, Dr. Arkels, I mean, how many languages does that guy speak? I mean, millions.
Lord knows. But the funny, he reads a lot more than he speaks.
Exactly. And of course, there's a point where if you only read, you'll not be able to speak. That's just not possible because, first of all, you have no idea how to pronounce things. So if you focus all your efforts on reading, you won't be able to speak. But I think what we're trying to say here, and in this episode, if we had to sort of summarize a motive, it would be reading is really more beneficial in a part of a sort of package where you're also speaking, you're also shadowing, you're also doing other things. And for me, I've definitely been neglecting reading, and I've just been kind of like, if I learn to speak, I'll probably learn to read after, right? And I think I'm noticing that that's probably not, for me at least, a good way to do it. And again, tying in with the first thing we were talking about changing your mind and method, I think that's totally going to do. I have some graded readers here for Russian. I got some A level, which is
there you go,
1,000-word vocabulary. And the interesting thing I found with these graded readers is that 1,000 words vocabulary doesn't mean 1,000 words in the sort of frequency form that we're quite used to. So there are still words that I don't understand in these, but I think I should be able to read them with a dictionary by hand, and I'll try it out, and I just need to put in the hours. I guess that's one thing that people might have a phobia against, putting in. I mean, if you want to read a book this one is 50 pages. If I want to read that and had to look up, let's say, every fifth word, maybe.
Yeah.
Just an estimate, but maybe the fifth word, it would take me quite a few hours to go through it.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And I think a lot of the focus right now is on how fast can we learn a language.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I think that's a weakness. I'd really love if we could get more focus on how well can we learn a language instead of how fast.
And I would also add, how fun can you learn a language?
Right. If you hate doing your flashcards 5 hours a day, well, why are you doing it?
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, I mean, I don't know if you can hear it in my voice when I mentioned this little documentary thing I just did. Like, holy Lord, was it fun? It was so fun. Like, I got through 6 episodes in like 3 days.
Right.
And here's the funny thing, I'm not just doing that. People might think, okay, this guy must just do languages all the time. No, I had a full-time job. I mean, I've learned all my French, like I said, roughly in about 15 months. And I was also learning other languages. I had a full-time job. I was doing my degree. I wasn't just doing that. But because it was so fun, you just managed to find time. And so you do learn quickly. But because the focus isn't on the quick, it's on the fun and it's on the well. And if you do it that way, you will actually learn quickly. But if you just, search for the fastest way. But I think the main thing you're doing with reading, and why reading is so important, is your reading will improve your vocabulary. It will. You might listen to a podcast and you might not understand it, and you may not really improve your vocabulary. You might do other things, but one thing that is very important in language learning, and I know Steve Kaufman is a massive proponent of this, is that you need to acquire words. And reading is one way that you will acquire a word. And this is why, like I said,
you see it in context.
Yes, exactly. So when all those books that I started and didn't finish, which I have now finished, like a good half of them now, I've gone back. And several of them I started multiple times. But every time I did that, and every time I looked at the word, I was improving my vocabulary. Even if I didn't remember the word the next day, I would see it again.
It's a very organic way of doing it as well, because you're engaging different areas of the brain. And if I had to criticize sort of flashcards, it would be that they're a very mechanical way to try and emulate natural ways of learning.
Yeah, exactly.
That's difficult for me because let's give a really specific example. If you're looking up a word, you could take the English word. Let's say I was learning English and the word in my flashcard was course. And I was like, okay, so I'm trying to learn this word. So I'm trying to tie it to something that will make it easier to remember. But the problem is the word is so flexible. Like there's a cause of death, there's a cause for concern, there's all these kind of causes. And
also because, and people say, because you're beautiful.
Right. And I guess of course isn't too far off, but the point being is that if you can't from the flashcard, and usually flashcards have to be quite condensed because you can't have like 50 pages of notes on each one, then it wouldn't work. The problem is that using a word out of context is just almost impossible. So I think if there had to be a flashcard revolution, it would be one where you learned phrases, or at least learned a word in a phrase, and then sort of used it actively. And I think that's what you're doing with reading, or even subtitles, because you see the word in action. So if you can't think of anything to connect the word with, you can always think of the one sentence that you do know there was.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, exactly. And once again, people that say I don't like reading, once again, that doesn't mean you can't still read, because like I said, because for example, if you don't like reading books, that's what people often mean. I don't like reading books. But a lot of people that don't like reading like films. I found that as a pattern. People that they want to watch the Harry Potter film, not read a Harry Potter book. Like I said, you can read the subtitles. That's reading. If you ask me, that is just as good of reading as anything else. Yeah,
and you can sit on your sofa. You can have your little notepad next to the film. Just pause it and write down the words.
Exactly. And so something I've noticed, which is so important, I think, is that I most of the time, if I had to compare myself to like most average language learners, normally I can improve my languages much faster living outside of the country, doing my little techniques, than people that I know living in the country. I normally still can improve much faster a lot of the time. No, I'm not talking about like polyglots, just saying, whatever, people studying abroad. And I've also noticed, since I've been living in France for this last 2 weeks, hey, I've realized my approach to quote unquote living in country, which I've had very little chance to do, I still approach it differently because I know people that are very advanced speakers in certain languages that live in the country and still can't read a book, right? Which is okay. Yeah. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that, but they have this like phobia to it. They're like, no, I just don't like reading. I'm not going to do it. And so it's true they've become very advanced speakers, but it's taken them quite a long time because they're insistent on just, okay, living in the country I will eventually learn it. And you know what? It can be true, but I've realized that even me living in the country, I'm improving my French so much faster than some people I know living in the country or other places because I'm taking advantage of France in different ways that they are. I'm taking advantage of the fact that I have French Netflix, right?
Right, and you just put the subtitles on there.
Having French Netflix is a bloody godsend because I'm not kidding, I can turn on a documentary that I love that I've seen in English or one that I haven't, and I literally have the option to click English voice, French voice, English subtitles, well, not English subtitles, but French subtitles on and off. And it is amazing, and that's how I'm taking advantage of being in France. It's funny, like, you know, okay, yeah, I'm surrounded by French people, but the one of the coolest things for me is I got all this new access to new material, and it's helping me improve my French exponentially. And all these people that several people I know that, like I said, several very advanced speakers, but they still can't read books, and they still struggle and they complain about it because everybody likes to complain. They're not doing these things. They're not reading books. They're not actually putting the time in and looking at. They might watch films. They're not studying the films. They're not. And I'm just saying that, you know, it can. There's a lot more that can be done than just being in the country and just getting to speak, to speakers. And if you do it the way, which is what I've done, and so like I did in Japan, I did that, and I did that for 3 years. I went to Japan and I had an interpreting job, and I was ready, and I spoke, and I made friends. And I barely spoke English for a long time because I had put the time in first. And I did the same thing with French. You know, before I went to a bakery the other day. I gave my CV in, and this is my first day in France, by the way, or second day in France. And it went so well. She literally had me in the back of the bloody bakery running like the drive-through window thingy. Well, like the walk. I'm not kidding you. I was running a cash register in French. Second day in France, I was running a bloody cash register, pressing buttons. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. You know, counting money. I got to tell you, I read books. I read literature. I read history books. I watch films. I don't count money in my free time in French. Right. So it was not hard. It was not easy for me. But the point is, because I prepared so much, my second day in France, I was able to go and run a cash register and have a job interview in French. And so this is the point. You can do so much, and that's what I really want to. If I could just transmit any kind of message to people, I hate to see people complain and limit themselves. You know, okay, well, I can't read, so I'm not going to do it, or like, you know, it's hard for me, I'm not going to do it, or whatever. It's hard for me because I don't live there. Or just these excuses. You know, there are so many things you can do. Yeah, and there are so many reading tools as well. Yeah. Like you mentioned Blue, but there's also like ReadLang and even Ling, online ways to sort of make reading a little bit more technological and a little bit more easy. Yeah, and there's another thing, there's the last thing. Some people will reply to this and they will say, to themselves, okay, well, that's different. It'd be different if you were in a country like Denmark or Sweden or Finland, where people speak English. You know, I hear this a lot too about speaking. And, you know, first of all, Japan is also a very challenging environment to speak Japanese in, even though it's not quite in the same way. But I went to Finland recently, and it was very, very interesting what happened. And my friend Irina was there to see this. It was, you know, I had been prepared for all of the same horror stories that I hear, but, you know, like people there they may not talk to you. You know, you may go into a shop and you'll speak in Finnish and they will reply in English. And, you know, all these things, same as in Japan. But some amazing things happened on my trip in Finland to where my friend Irina was like baffled. We just didn't understand what was going on because every time I tried to speak Finnish, they replied in Finnish. And it was like, and she kept kind of telling me, like, you know, don't worry, you'll be disappointed soon. You know, sooner or later, someone's going to say no. Well, let me tell you what happened, Chris. I sat down at a cafe and I employed the techniques that I use in Japan. I buy a book, right? And I sat in a cafe and I just read this book, right? This is what I do. This is one way that I meet people. And I get stuck inevitably, and I asked somebody for help. I asked the person sitting next to me for help, and normally they either run away, which has actually never happened, but that could happen. In Japan, a few times people just like freak out and like choke on their coffee and but normally they will help, and they will either simply help you and then walk away, or they will start a conversation with you. And what happened to me, Chris, literally when I told Irina what happened when I came home, her words were like, what effing country have you been in today? Because it definitely wasn't Finland, because I sat there, and the first lady I asked, I had a little children's book, kind of endearing. I think she noticed I was reading it, probably figured out I was a foreigner, probably thought, why the heck is he learning Finnish? And I asked her for help, and we had like a 35-minute chat, not in Finnish at this point, because I was a very low-level speaker. But we had a chat, and I broke this barrier, right? The second lady that sat down, inevitably I got stuck about 5 minutes later, and I asked her for help. We had like an hour-long chat, lovely lady, and I asked her for her advice. I said, do you have any books you recommend to me? Because I love reading. And she thought about it. She recommended a book to me, and then she said, I have to go. So we said goodbye. She came back 5 minutes later with the same book she had recommended to me in her hand, and she had actually bought this book for me, and she gave it to me. I'm not kidding.
Are you sure she was Finnish?
This is the thing. She was full-blooded Finnish. And then right after that, I ended up getting an email address from a bloody cashier at the same cafe, because I was like, well, there's no one sitting next to me now. I'm stuck. So I went over to the cash register, because she had no customers, and I asked her for help. And she thought it was so adorable that she gave me like a free drink card, and then I got her email address. And when I told Irina these things, she just couldn't believe it, because it wasn't the same Finland. All that I'm saying is, I think that there's something. I'm trying to figure out what it is. I think there's something in what I do, or how I do it, or whatever, that triggers. It's not. I don't think it's a coincidence that I had the exact same sort of freakish experience in Japan and in Finland and other places. And I just mentioned that because, once again, people make excuses. A lot of people, okay, well, if you're in this country, it's different. The people won't talk to you. I think it is doable, and I don't like seeing people limit themselves. There's a lot of things people can do. And like you said, whether that may change over time, your method may change, it may develop. But just know, that's a natural process, and you're still going to get there, but you have to try,
Exactly. And confidence is everything. But, yeah, and I really enjoyed that anecdote as well. And I suppose it's a tip for people who are a little bit, I guess, scared to meet people, that, sitting in a sort of protected environment in a cafe with a book in your hand, asking people for help is a kind of a very safe way, and it's not very, it doesn't take too much courage to ask someone.
Exactly, and it works, man.
But asking someone in the street.
Yeah, asking a free, especially in like Paris, like, heck, this is Paris, man. Like, you can't even make eye contact. It's probably a homeless person that's going to ask you for money.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But you can find ways, man. I could talk all day about different ways you can meet people, and the reason I brought that up is because quite a lot lately I've read articles and stuff, and I'm not criticizing the people that say these things at all. I'm just saying that I have a different view on it, and it's possible. And that time in Finland for me was a very, very interesting experiment, because it was just like in Japan. Because when I told people in Japan the reactions that I had, the fact that I made such a strong connection with an old lady owning a bento shop in Japan, that when I left after just 6 weeks, her husband gave me his only souvenir he had left from his photography career. He gave me his old camera lens. I mean, people couldn't believe it. They were like, "What country were you in?" And I don't think it's a coincidence that they had the exact same reaction. And I'm certain, if I was in Finland the exact same time, but as an advanced speaker, someone like that, where I like what I've done in French and in my other languages, where I've learned a lot before I went, I'm pretty certain I could have gotten people to speak with me in Finnish more, because they did speak to me in Finnish. Right. It was just that then I hit my little limit where I couldn't go any further. Because I had studied Finnish for very little, very, very little, at that time. But I'm certain that I could have gotten those people to speak with me in Finnish. And so
It's a cool example, and I'm glad you brought it up. But unfortunately, like most good things, we also have to end at some point. And we could talk.
How did we do?
Ages,
are we on time?
We've probably exceeded most people's
darn.
What do you call it? Concentration range by about 100%.
I tried so hard.
Yeah, people can do it in 2 shots, right? If they really wanted to. But anyway, if you're listening through to this point, just want to say thank you for sticking with us, because I think that it was worth it for sure. And I want to thank you as well, Robin, for, as always, bringing such a...
No, thank you for having me, Chris. Thanks for putting up with my babbling and...
No worries. And next time we will hear from you again about maybe you've made some similar discoveries next time from America.
I am. I would love to talk to you again, Chris. And like I said, just thanks for having me, and thank you for everybody that has listened this long.
Yeah, they're all waiting for you to put out the next segment of your life. I'll link to the vlog you did the other day, so people can see an update.
Yeah, please do. My website is finally actually being used now, so you can go to thelifeofrob.com, spelled out normally, and I am now, although my show is on hold at the moment, I've decided I am writing blogs now, and I am actually posting little video logs because I wanted to get involved a little more and contribute to the online discussions. And so, please feel free to go check it out. I just published my first video log about achieving native fluency, not being in the country. So.
Fantastic. And then people can see your level.
Yes, I did it in French purposely because I knew I'd make mistakes, because I knew that my accent wasn't perfect, and I wanted to show people, with nothing held back, exactly where my French is, and that it's okay to make mistakes. Yeah,
it sounded good to me, but then again, I'm probably a poor juror on this.
Well, and I appreciate that, but that was the point. It was that I know I made mistakes, but I still did it in French, and the fact is, I'm learning German right now, and like you mentioned earlier, I can't speak German. I've learned a lot of German words, but I can't speak yet, and that's okay. And one day I will probably do a video just like that in German in the future. But I don't really care how long that takes, because I know that eventually I will start speaking in German, and it'll be fine.
Fantastic. All right, Robin. Take care.
Thanks, Chris.
See
Bye.
you soon.